Monday mornings at Brookvale Systems always felt like stepping into a malfunctioning espresso machine. Loud, erratic, and guaranteed to spray chaos in every direction. I hadn't even finished my first sip of coffee when the first email hit. Payroll flagged 3 departments with unpaid invoices. 2 clients were threatening to suspend contracts over billing irregularities. And someone, God help me, left a post-it on my monitor that said, "Ethan's lunch reimbursement. Urgent. No receipts. No explanation." Just his name, like graffiti scrawled across my sanity. Ethan Brooks, the CEO's son. Think of every frat boy who thought he was destined for Forbes 30 Under 30, only to end up managing vibes instead of people. That's Ethan. Our last CFO once called him a trust fund tornado in dress shoes. He wasn't wrong. I'm Laura Mitchell, Senior Operations Manager, 6 years deep into this corporate labyrinth. I'm the one who quietly tapes the company's finances back together after Ethan's executive vision leaves scorch marks on the ledger. And while he ricochets from Aspen to Austin building partnerships, I'm the one fielding vendor calls, damage control, and the unpaid invoice symphony that follows in his wake. That Monday, my desk looked like a war map. One monitor filled with an Excel sheet that resembled a crime scene, the other pinging non-stop with messages from accounts payable, contractors threatening to pause services, procurement demanding updates, finance pretending not to see the smoke. And as always, nobody dared question Ethan's discretionary spending, because apparently, nepotism grants full immunity from audits. I opened the company card log, bracing myself, and nearly gave myself an aneurysm. Miami bottle service, $1,250. Vegas client outreach, $4,900. No memos, no cost center codes, just vibes and visa charges. But I didn't snap. I never snap. I fix things. Silently, efficiently, invisibly. The office janitor in a blazer, scrubbing away messes no one admits exist. What kept me going? The one light at the end of this bureaucratic tunnel, was the Global Leadership Summit in Denver. Fully sponsored, approved after 3 years of waiting. HR confirmed it Friday. I'd printed the itinerary, taped it to my fridge next to my cat's insulin schedule, even picked out my first new blazer since 2018. For once, the company was investing in me. That summit wasn't just a trip. It was validation, proof that maybe someone saw me. Tuesday, 9:15 a.m., our weekly operations sync. Everyone was logged in except Ethan, who crashed the Zoom 8 minutes late, chewing gum and wearing mirrored shades indoors. He looked like he was auditioning for a Mentos commercial. We ran through budgets, vendor issues, and headcount updates. My trip wasn't on the agenda, so I relaxed, until he dropped it. "Oh, and hey," he said, mid-scroll. "Cut Laura's summit travel, budget constraints." Sorry. He said it like asking for extra ketchup. No warning, no explanation, no eye contact. Just a verbal guillotine. There was a chuckle from HR, the nervous kind people make when they're trying not to wince. Dead silence followed. My face burned, but I kept smiling. Corporate muscle memory. I nodded like an animatronic bobblehead while my insides turned to static. "Copy that?" I managed, voice flat. Then I muted myself and stared at my keyboard until the meeting ended. I've eaten my share of corporate humiliation. Skipped promotions, stolen credit, being told to smile more in performance reviews. But this was personal. The summit was earned, approved, budgeted. He erased it with one sentence. As the meeting dragged on about snack budgets and Slack etiquette, I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not sadness, something sharper. Clarity. You can only be ignored for so long before invisibility becomes armor. Ethan had no idea what he'd just triggered. When the call ended, I didn't speak, didn't rage. I just stared at the fading Zoom screen under fluorescent light, cold coffee in hand. "Budget constraints," he'd said, smirking, like this was a game and I was a pawn, but he'd just made the wrong move, and I'd spent my entire career learning how to document checkmate. The rest of that day, I moved through the office like a ghost, smiling when needed, typing, answering emails, cleaning up Ethan's vendor chaos with the precision of a surgeon and the apathy of someone freshly hollowed out. Outwardly, I was calm. Inwardly, scorched earth. That leadership summit had been the one thing I allowed myself to hope for, not dream, because I'd outgrown that, but believe in. I had written the pitch to justify the cost, built ROI projections for travel-based training, secured finance pre-approval, and received HR's sign-off. Everything by the book. And Ethan, in his infinite mediocrity, gutted it with a shrug. I didn't vent in Slack or post vague LinkedIn wisdom about closed doors. I sat in the silence that follows betrayal, the kind that doesn't confuse you, but clarifies you. It was the stillness before something seismic. Around 4:45 p.m., I got a ping on Teams. Ethan's assistant, cheerful as ever. "Hey, Laura, Ethan wants to know if we can expedite the Q3 invoice reconciliation. He's under pressure from the board." The smiley face nearly gave me a migraine. I typed back, "Of course. I'll handle it." Sent. Closed chat. Then opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the locked one. Inside sat a red binder I hadn't touched in months. No, it wasn't some dramatic revenge dossier. It was my Bible. Risk management frameworks, financial continuity plans, policy appendices. The spine was worn from years of invisible labor. My fingers brushed against it, and I remembered. Months ago, during the company's liquidity scare, Ethan had begged me to draft an emergency continuity plan to make him look competent in front of the board. I wrote it. He signed it without reading, of course, between bites of a turkey wrap, asking if the board would like his new cologne. I kept a copy for legal and one for me, because I trust neither the cloud nor Ethan Brooks. That memory flickered back, vivid as a warning light. There was something in that plan, a clause that mattered. I didn't pull the binder out yet, just let my thumb rest on the tab. Calculation hummed where outrage used to be. He might have cut my trip, but I'd taken notes. That night, I made the mistake of checking Instagram. Ethan still followed me. I never unfollowed, maybe because it felt like acknowledgement to do so. I told myself I just wanted to see what budget constraints looked like in his world. And there it was, a rooftop bar in Miami. Ethan, grinning like a used car salesman on a sugar high, holding a magnum of champagne. Behind him, palm trees, bottle sparklers, and 2 sales reps I recognized pretending they weren't mortified. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings. Executive energy, hat team win." The champagne label caught the light, and behind it, just barely visible, a receipt. 4 digits I knew too well. 0437. The company card. My card. The same one that couldn't cover a leadership summit under $900. He was literally drinking my professional development out of a gold-rimmed glass. My body went completely still. I didn't scream. Didn't text him. Didn't screenshot it. I just sat there in my apartment, motionless. The blue glow of the screen reflecting off the framed HR award for operational excellence. My cat, Pepper, jumped onto my lap. I didn't move. It wasn't incompetence anymore. It was intentional, calculated disrespect. By the time the realization crystallized, I was already in my car, engine on, the parking lot empty. 10 minutes later, I was back at the office. The building was dark, except for the emergency lights. My heels echoed down the hall as I unlocked my office door, flicked on the lamp, and opened the drawer. The red binder thudded onto the desk like a sealed verdict. No drama, just the quiet sound of inevitability. I flipped through the laminated tabs until I found it. The document from that liquidity scare. Clause 14C. The one Ethan never noticed. The one that, if my memory was right, could change everything. I sat under the dim desk lamp, the room tinted amber, and began rereading Clause 14C. My own handwriting annotated the margin. Activation threshold equal 10% discretionary overage. Exhibit B-E's designated controller. That controller was me. I remembered sliding that clause in on page 14 of the continuity plan months ago while Ethan scrolled on his phone, pretending to care. I'd read every other paragraph out loud to him, just not that one. He'd signed between bites of his sandwich, never glancing past the word allocation. Classic Ethan. Attention span of a TikTok, ego of a board chair. Now, his budget constraint excuse had come full circle. I flipped to the most recent quarterly ledger and began cross-referencing transactions. Miami bottle service. Check. Vegas client outreach. Check. A private driver in Phoenix for an industry event that coincidentally overlapped with an EDM festival. Check. No memos, no approvals, no departmental codes. I ran the totals 3 times. 12.4% over discretionary budget. Trigger threshold breached. I opened a fresh audit log and started documenting. Trigger condition met per clause 14C. Authority transfer pending board review. I initialed every line. That binder had always been my shield. Tonight, it became a sword. By midnight, I had copies printed, time-stamped, labeled, one for legal, one for home. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Revenge wasn't the point. Accountability was. But in the corporate ecosystem, those two often look identical. The next morning, I came in early, coffee in hand, binder locked in my drawer. The office smelled like burnt toner and resignation. At 3:42 p.m., an email from Ethan landed in my inbox, subject line in all caps. Urgent, 6K, needed now. No greeting, no details. Just, need 6K from discretionary to cover payroll gap. Pull from temp account. Explain later. Make it happen. I stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds, almost impressed by the audacity. The man had just violated a spending clause he didn't know existed, and now he was trying to use the same fund I controlled. I didn't rant. I didn't forward it. I just typed back one sentence. Check the red binder. Sent. That was it. No emojis, no context. 4 words that weighed like a manhole cover. Then I leaned back and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No reply. 4 p.m. Silence. 4:30. Still nothing. The hum of computers dimmed as finance staff started logging off for the weekend. Outside my office, the hallway felt hollow. The kind of silence that arrives before a storm. I pictured him somewhere upstairs, rifling through drawers, barking questions at assistants, realizing too late that he'd never even seen the red binder. He wouldn't find it. The digital version sat buried in the legal drive under the world's most boring file name, FCP's Audit Amendment V2 Final 5, DOS-CX. Even I had to double-check it sometimes. By 5:15, I heard hurried footsteps, heels, maybe one of his assistants, then quiet again. My inbox stayed empty. I shut my laptop, turned off the light, and left. The clause was live now, quietly ticking like a paper time bomb. Come Monday, someone was going to ask why the $6,000 transfer hadn't cleared. And when they did, the audit trail would surface. Clause 14C would activate publicly. Ethan Brooks would be forced to explain how his budget cuts led to bottle service and payroll delays. I didn't need to expose him. He'd done it himself. All I did was write it down. There's a certain power in stillness, in letting someone dig their own hole while you simply document the depth. As I walked through the empty parking lot, the air smelled like rain and ozone. I didn't feel victorious. I felt inevitable. Ethan had been playing short-term, parties, posts, illusions of control. I'd been playing long-term, policy, procedure, structure. He built bonfires. I built binders. And only one of those survives the audit. Monday morning came with that strange electric quiet that only precedes chaos. My phone buzzed at 8:27 a.m. A calendar invite marked Emergency Finance Session, 9:00 a.m., Boardroom A. No subject, no agenda, just that thin, coded tension between the lines that meant someone was about to start sweating through a suit. I closed the message, unlocked my drawer, and pulled out the red binder. It felt heavier now, or maybe I just finally admitted what it represented. At 9:00 sharp, I walked into the boardroom. The air was sharp with fresh coffee and panic. Around the long mahogany table sat faces in various stages of disbelief. The chairman, Robert Wells, looked like he'd aged a decade since Friday. Megan from legal had dark circles deep enough to qualify as legal disclaimers, and Greg from finance kept blinking like someone who'd discovered a typo in his mortgage. Ethan, of course, wasn't there yet. I took my usual seat, not at the head, not even close, just the quiet corner where I could see everything. The CEO, Richard Brooks, walked in moments later. Crisp navy suit, measured expression, that same look he wore whenever he was about to pretend neutrality in a family disaster. "Morning, Laura," he said, voice clipped. "Morning," I replied. The door swung open before he could continue. Ethan stumbled in, sunglasses perched on his head, tie loose, face pale but still trying for swagger. "Look," he started mid-sentence. I didn't know she'd actually interpret the clause like that. It was supposed to be placeholder language. He waved a stack of papers like a talisman. "We've always had flexibility with discretionary funds." The chairman raised a hand. "Ethan, sit down." He did, jaw clenched, shooting me a look like I'd crashed his yacht. "We're here," Wells continued, "to discuss the failure to release emergency funds on Friday, per your claim, due to Laura's refusal to process." 6 pairs of eyes turned to me. I didn't flinch. Instead, I placed the binder on the table, flipped it open, and slid it across to Megan. No speech, no drama, just documentation. "Clause 14C, I said evenly. "Financial Continuity Plan, signed March 14th at 10:41 p.m. Trigger condition met. Discretionary spending exceeded 10% of quarterly allocation without supporting documentation." My tone was clinical, like reciting weather data. "Per protocol, control of the Emergency Operational Fund reverts to the designated controller pending board review." Megan adjusted her glasses and scanned the pages. Greg frowned. 10%? That can't be right. Megan raised her head slowly. "It's accurate. We verified the numbers this morning. Miami? Vegas? Phoenix? None coded, none approved." Richard Brooks exhaled, slow, resigned. Ethan laughed, a brittle, desperate sound that cracked halfway through. "You're telling me I lost access because of a binder?" "No," I said, folding my hands. "Because of your spending." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, silence was his only defense. "Is this clause enforceable?" Wells asked, without looking up. "It is," Megan answered. "Signed, time-stamped, and logged on record." The word enforceable hung in the air like a gavel strike. The HVAC hummed overhead, louder than anyone dared speak. "This isn't about $6,000 anymore," Wells said quietly. "It's about oversight." Greg nodded faintly. "And negligence." Ethan shifted in his chair. "We've always had flexibility. Everyone knows that." "No," I said, calm as glass. "You assumed that." His jaw worked, but no sound came. Wells turned back to me. "Laura, do you currently hold control over the emergency fund?" "Yes," I replied. "Is payroll covered?" "Processed this morning." A few heads turned, eyebrows raised. Greg looked half shocked, half impressed. "You had it ready Friday night?" I nodded once. Documentation was complete. Megan kept flipping pages, each turn sounding like a countdown. The boardroom had gone eerily still, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing. They weren't looking at Ethan anymore. They were looking at me. And for the first time in 6 years, the quiet wasn't invisibility, it was power. The boardroom air had the density of wet concrete. No one moved, no one spoke. Megan turned to the final page of the binder, her lips tightening as her eyes traced the signature line. Signed by Ethan Brooks, she said aloud, March 14th, 10:41 p.m. The sound of his own name under legal citation hit harder than any accusation. Ethan blinked, his face pale beneath the fluorescent glare. "Wait, hold on," he stammered. "That was supposed to be a formality, just a draft. We needed the board's signature to open the account. It wasn't meant to actually trigger anything." Megan didn't look up. Intent doesn't override written agreement. Her voice was dry, absolute. This clause is legally enforceable, and currently active. Ethan's mouth opened, but what came out wasn't argument. It was confession. "I didn't even read." He stopped himself, realizing too late that every syllable hung in the air like a flare over a battlefield. Robert Wells leaned forward. "You didn't read, but you signed. You authorized your own restriction." He turned to me. "Ms. Mitchell, your actions were within compliance?" "Fully," I replied, steady. Clause 14C specifies the controller shall act to maintain operational continuity in the event of discretionary overages beyond 10%. "I acted accordingly." Wells nodded, once, slow. The decision was already forming behind his eyes. Richard Brooks, the CEO, the father, kept his gaze fixed on the table. His jaw tightened, but he didn't intervene. He couldn't. The evidence was paper-bound and time-stamped. "So, as of now," Wells said finally. "Laura controls the Emergency Operational Fund," Megan confirmed. "Yes, and payroll was processed on time, as she stated." A few quiet gasps rippled down the table, the sound of recalibration. Ethan's composure cracked. "We can't just hand that kind of control over to her. She's not you." Greg from finance snapped before he could finish. The words landed like a thunderclap. "She's the reason this department hasn't collapsed under your spending sprees." Ethan turned, stunned, but Greg wasn't done. "You think numbers fix themselves? You think budgets hold because of vibes and hashtags?" His voice rose, trembling with pent-up irritation. "She's the one keeping us solvent." The silence that followed was thick, brittle. Ethan's bravado deflated. "Look, this isn't personal." He tried again, his voice cracking. "The spending was just team building, you know? Momentum for Q4. The parties were—" "Stop," Wells said flatly. The temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. "This isn't about one trip or one bottle. This is about fiduciary negligence." Ethan's throat bobbed. He looked around the table, pleading with familiar faces that suddenly wouldn't meet his eyes. The same people who'd laughed at his jokes, signed his proposals, reposted his executive energy selfies, now stone silent, calculating their exit routes. I met his gaze. Not with malice, not even triumph, just the calm recognition of a truth too long delayed. He looked down at the table, at his own signature printed in black ink, proof of his undoing. "Finance," Wells said, turning to Greg. "Suspend Ethan's discretionary access immediately, cards included." "On it," Greg said, already typing. Ethan jolted upright. "Wait, you're cutting me off? You can't—" "You did that yourself," Wells said, without raising his voice. Megan reached for a small stack of printed pages beside her laptop. Expense screenshots, transaction logs, timestamps. She slid them across the table toward him. Exhibit backups, she said simply. He picked them up, skimmed the top sheet, and went still. The blood drained from his face as the total line came into focus. I didn't move, didn't smirk, didn't say a word, because I didn't need to. Paper speaks louder than outrage. There was no shouting, no grand speeches, just the sound of realization spreading like ink across a page. The meeting wasn't over, but Ethan was. The door opened 15 minutes later, interrupting the tension like a gavel strike. In walked James Whitmore, external counsel, brought in whenever the board smelled potential liability. He was the kind of man who made paper clips seem emotionally expressive. Silver hair perfectly parted, suit the color of midnight, expression unreadable. He didn't greet anyone, just set his briefcase down, slid into the empty seat beside Megan, and said, "Let's see the document." Megan passed him the binder, her movements careful, almost reverent. He opened it to the flagged page and began to read silently. The only sound in the room was the faint scrape of paper. Ethan sat frozen, one leg bouncing under the table like a faulty metronome. Everyone else watched Whitmore's eyes move line by line, sentence by sentence, their anticipation growing heavier with every slow turn of the page. 10 minutes passed before he spoke. "Clause 14C, he said finally, his voice low and deliberate. He read aloud, each word striking the air like a pin drop. In the event that discretionary overage exceeds 10% of quarterly allocations without documented justification, all authority over the Emergency Operational Fund shall transfer to the undersigned controller listed in Exhibit B, effective immediately for a term of 90 days or until a board override is issued." He stopped, let the silence breathe, then continued. "Exhibit B, Laura Mitchell." His eyes lifted to the table, pausing on Ethan, then on me. "It's airtight," he said softly. 3 syllables that detonated like a depth charge beneath Ethan's chair. The word hung there, airtight, a verdict disguised as an adjective. Ethan blinked. His lips parted, but nothing came out. His skin had gone pale. The smugness evaporated. He looked at me not with anger, but dread, the realization finally clawing its way to the surface. He'd been playing checkers while I was building the board. "This can't be real," he whispered, half to himself. "You're saying I lost control because of one clause?" "Because you signed it," Whitmore replied calmly, "without review." Richard Brooks exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked older now, shoulders heavy under the weight of nepotism made visible. "James," he said, "what's our exposure? Financial?" "Minimal," Whitmore said. "Reputational?" "Considerable. But there's no legal ambiguity here. The clause is valid, active, and binding." He tapped the binder once, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Frankly, I'm more concerned about the spending patterns this document exposes." That landed like a nail in a coffin. The CEO straightened, forcing composure. "We'll handle this internally," he said tightly. "We always do," Wells muttered under his breath. Ethan shifted in his seat, searching for some lifeline. "Dad," he started, but Richard didn't look at him. "Enough," he said quietly. That single word, spoken by the man who'd protected him all his life, silenced him more completely than anything else could have. I sat still, binder closed now, resting under my hand. Not triumphant, steady. The victory wasn't loud. It wasn't even satisfying. It was precise, clean, accounted for. Ethan leaned back, his confidence hollowed out, his voice barely above a whisper. You planned this? No, I said simply. You signed this. He flinched. Paper doesn't argue. It just records. Around the table, heads began to turn, people recalibrating silently. For 6 years, I'd been the wallpaper, the background presence keeping everything running while louder, flashier people took credit. But now the architecture was visible. The system was mine, because I built it. Whitmore closed the binder carefully, his hand steady, but his voice softer now. You've just witnessed the rarest form of corporate justice, he said. Accountability that doesn't need a courtroom. His words weren't praise, but recognition, the kind professionals reserve for someone who speaks their language fluently. Policy, procedure, precision. I nodded once. Across the table, Ethan sat motionless, eyes unfocused, staring at the very document that ended him. The same one he'd signed without care, now carved with his name like an epitaph. The meeting ended not with shouting or scandal, but with paperwork. Megan closed the binder slowly, aligning the corners before setting it down like she was sealing a tomb. Let the record reflect, she said, voice steady. Effective immediately, Laura Mitchell is designated controller of the Emergency Operational Fund for the next 90 days, pending board review. Her pen scratched across the minutes. The decision was made, simple as that. No applause, no fanfare, just signatures, initials, acknowledgement. The kind of quiet transfer of power that happens every day in corporate America. Except this time, it happened to someone who was never supposed to hold it. I straightened my notes, already preparing the transition checklist in my head. I'll have a procedural summary to the board by end of day, I said. Greg from finance smiled faintly. Of course you will. His tone carried something that sounded dangerously close to respect. The chairman nodded once. Good work, Miss Mitchell. Then, turning to the CEO, he added with dry finality, I trust you'll address the family matter. Richard Brooks' face didn't move, but the silence around him said everything. Ethan sat slumped at the end of the table, eyes fixed on nothing. His phone screen glowed faintly beside him, the same screen that had broadcast his rooftop executive energy party to the world. A single stupid Instagram story had become the fuse to his undoing. Finance, Wells continued. Ensure Ethan's corporate cards and discretionary access are suspended immediately. Greg typed without hesitation. The sound of the keyboard filled the room like a countdown. Ethan flinched. You're cutting me off? You can't. Wells didn't even glance at him. You did that yourself. Megan slid a folder toward me. Copies for your records. Binders being logged as evidence for compliance. I nodded, tucking the documents neatly inside. Across from me, Ethan's voice cracked. This isn't fair. I was just trying to build momentum. The trips, the events, they were for morale. You mean the morale of your reflection? Greg muttered. No one laughed. There was no humor left in the room, only fatigue. The exhaustion of watching arrogance run out of runway. Wells stood, signaling the end. Chairs scraped back, laptops closed. Conversations hushed into the background hum of bureaucracy reasserting itself. I gathered the binder, its red cover gleaming under the recessed lights. The weight felt different now. Not burden, not defense. Authority. I slipped it under my arm, stood, and thanked the room. No one stopped me. No one questioned me. As I reached the door, I heard the chairman say, almost to himself, This company runs on people like her, not boys who think audits are optional. The door shut behind me with a soft click. The hallway outside was bright, sterile, ordinary. My heels echoed on the tile. For the first time in years, the sound didn't feel lonely. Through the glass wall, I could still see the boardroom. Ethan remained seated, staring at his phone, scrolling through his own downfall. The Miami rooftop, the receipt, the caption that now read like evidence. His shoulders slumped, his face blank. The noise was gone, the performance stripped away. I turned and walked on, past the open offices, past the framed company slogans about integrity in action. My reflection in the glass looked calm, composed, whole. There's a misconception that revenge has to be loud, that justice needs fireworks. It doesn't. Sometimes it's a paper trail. Sometimes it's a clause buried on page 14. Sometimes it's a woman who spent her career cleaning up messes finally closing the binder and walking away. By the time I reached my office, the adrenaline had burned off, leaving only quiet satisfaction. The clean kind. The kind that doesn't gloat, doesn't tweet, doesn't post. I placed the binder back into the drawer, locked it, and stared at my screensaver, a mountain sunrise from a photo I took years ago before ambition got tangled with survival. I smiled, barely. Payroll was processed, the books were balanced, order restored. The company would keep moving, and maybe, just maybe, people would finally see who'd been steering all along. Ethan Brooks learned the hard way that arrogance has an expiration date, and policy doesn't blink. As for me, I didn't need applause. I had documentation.